Hello, welcome back to the Hangout. My name is Joel Telfa, and I'm the host for the Hangout debate. Remember, the Hangout is brought to you by Speech Forces Organization with the collaboration of Media Inc. and sponsored by Codex and Nest Consulting. We are going into the next phase of today's discussion. We are looking at the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, before that, I'd like to read a few of the comments. Many of you have enjoyed the first phase of our discussion, and I'll take the opportunity to do that. Kudus Ajibade Ademi says leadership. Babasule says great team. Thank you. Kelvin Jr. Kel says nice one, Aaron. As a Ghanaian, there's also the need to care about what's happening in Nigeria because of the serious economic impact it can have on us. And I think going into our discussion, we'll be looking at that very shortly. Ajekum Ijao says great team, great initiative. Ale Adiola says also Burna Boy launched his career on a messianic platform. He's the one claiming to be fella. That's a very interesting one. And then he says Telfa, Karim and Ellie, y'all are more Nigerians than some of us, man. You know everything about the country, just switch citizenship already. I think Ellie has already done that. It remains to be seen whether Karim and I will do that as well. Amechi Victor says this is awesome. I don't support the call-out culture of some brands and celebrities, although their iconography can reach a greater publicity, but we are placing too much responsibilities on their shoulders. Most successful protests and activisms are carried out by faceless individuals. And the last one I'll read is by Innocent Amara, who says, thanks guys for this discussion. Very interesting one we have there. So we are going into the second phase of our discussion today. We are having a debate about the African Continental Free Trade Area. As you may be aware, the Afcfta was launched recently and has its secretariat in Accra. Trade amongst African countries is at an all-time high with China. So intra-African trade has slowed and has seen its lowest levels. It raises the issue as to whether Africa should be trading more with itself or be trading with its external partners. And that is what we're looking at currently. We're looking at if the issues of Afcfta necessarily promote integration among the African people, and it's a step that we should be proud to take. We are joined today by Mr. David Ejim, who is a co-founder and chief operating officer for a biotech startup, Biomass Systems. You should check them out. He has an MSc in medical and veterinary microbiology from the University of Ilorin and is also a BSc holder in microbiology from the University of Calabar. He's co-founder and pioneer for Voice of Reason, an important advocacy group in Nigeria, and has taught debate and public speaking at the University of Ilorin for a while now. Mr. Aaron Ikomi joins us from our series last week. He won last week's competitive debate competition. He's an MPhil student at the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. His research interests include Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's work, Pan-Africanism, Afrofuturism, African literature, and African politics. He aspires to be an academic in African studies and Pan-Africanism. So these are our two gentlemen. Gentlemen, welcome. I'm happy to have you guys here today. Just to quickly remind you of the format, each speaker will be entitled to 10 minutes to address you, after which we would have 5 minutes for responses, and then 3 minutes to address your questions, and then provide your summations in respect of the conversation. Let me run you through today's topic quite quickly. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement aims to accelerate intra-African trade and boost Africa's trading position in the global market by strengthening Africans' common voice and policy space in the global trade negotiations. Mr. Aaron Ikomi proposes the common market as a panacea to the African political and economic integration crisis. David Ejim dissents. Without much ado, I shall invite Mr. Aaron Ikomi to open today's conversation and let us know why he proposes this as a panacea to our integration problems. Please take it.
Thank you very much, Joel Telfa. I'm glad to be back here to start the debate. Welcome, former debate coach, Mr. Ejim. So today's debate, as already introduced, as a Pan-Africanist as I am, I think the Afcfta agreement is long overdue, and I'm here to explain why, or argue why I think the Afcfta trade is long overdue. Once again, I'm an Nkrumahist by ideology, by philosophy, and by beliefs, and so most of my arguments will be based upon the thinking and projections that Nkrumah made in relation to African economic integration. So I'll start with a Swahili saying, because as Pan-Africanists as we are too, we take high pride in the African sayings, because we believe that the philosophy of Africa is in the African sayings. There's a Swahili saying that Ujuma ni nguvu, intengano ni indangwafu. I hope I got it right. But it basically means, and it's a popular saying across many ethnic groups in Africa, that united we stand, divided we fall. There are many ethnic groups of the East in Nigeria also have a saying which in English translates to the failure to travel in groups habit of snakes makes them easy for humans to kill them makes it easy for humans to kill them with machetes. Now why do I take these two sayings? These two sayings are because it tells us that as individual as we are easily attacked and easily opposed rather than when we stand collectively as a group. And it's the same reasons why we have to do with economic integration. Individually, we are weaker than we are collectively. And when we achieved independence, Nkrumah had 4 stages of the African liberation. The first stage was the attainment of freedom and independence, which came mostly in the 50s and 60s across many countries in Africa. The second stage was the consolidation of the freedom and independence that we had got, right? Which was why people had to fight for their independence, and he supported the independence and nation building, which we spoke about last week. The third thing is the creation of community and unity between the independent African states. So that was why he wanted a political union, the Organization of African Union, and eventually in the 70s there was the ECOWAS community, there's the EAC, and the SADC, which has been created. Now the last stage is the economic and social reconstruction of Africa, and that is where we are today. Why we need economic restructuring, because that will be the last stage of liberation. Now you see, political leadership, why we have done all this and why this is responsible for consolidating our political against us. That political, as Nkrumah also said, that political leadership is responsible for determining the economic agenda, and the role of economists is to fulfill that agenda. As Africans, right, because we come from a colonial system, most of the economies are structured across colonial lines. We are raw material producing economies, and everyone wants to trade with the European economies and the economies of the world in great strength. Africa has 55 fragmented economies, and trade among them is the lowest. Trade among Africans is the lowest anywhere among any group in the world. The combined total power of most African economies is about $3 trillion, which is just enough to battle the 9th biggest economy in the world in Brazil. What this means is that, and even with these figures, the combined economic power of the top 6 African economies is equal to the strength of about over $2 trillion, which means that there are about 45 plus African countries collectively who come together to have a combined economic power of $1 trillion, which is way below even what the 10th and 11th economies of the world like Canada, etc. have. So individually, these countries are small and might not be able to have a pulling power to be able to trade with this. So what has been suggested? What is the Afcfta about? So in March 2018, at the meeting of African Union in Kigali, member states agreed to create an African continental free trade area. Now this goes back to the economic and social reconstruction of Africa. What are the benefits of this? There are 3 main benefits that we tend to derive from this. 1, all 54 African economies together will have a collective GDP of over $3 trillion a year, making it the 8th largest economy in the world. Let's not forget that Nkrumah's proposition of integration served as the blueprint for the European Union. Now the European Union has 3 zones. It has the EU, European Union, the European Economic Area, and the Eurozone. Compulsorily, not all countries are part of this, but if you check, every country in that zone is part of the European Economic Area, which covers more countries and have ties to trade among themselves, making them solid. Having taken from this blueprint, you realize that the EU and most EU countries trade with African blocs as African nations. So you have a China-African relations, you have the Russian-African relations, you have the US-UK African relations, because in the EU-African relations, there's an EU commissioner to Africa, because they understand the importance of trading in this bloc, even though they were the people who convinced African leaders not to go against this. So a population of, they're having 54 countries in one market, gives a market population of over 1.2 billion people, with most of them a youthful population. The average age of the African is 21 years old. So not just that, we are having people dealing in goods and services, but the East African community, which is growing in the venture capital area too, can tap into the technological advances or the technological likes that most African youth have to grow to grow their businesses. Secondly, there's going to be free movement of people. Now in the before pre-independence, Lord Lugard, one of the people who was one of the main monuments of the British colonial system, said that the material development of Africa may be summed up in one word: transportation. When we are able to connect Africa, and this is part of the AU Agenda 2063 of trying to connect the four walls of Africa, having road or having transportation systems from Dakar in the westernmost part of Africa to Nairobi in the easternmost part of Africa, and from Cape Town in the southernmost part of Africa to places like Casablanca and Cairo in the northernmost part of Africa, and having a central point in DR Congo, where we can, in DR Congo Kinshasa, where we can move across all African countries. Now, reducing the stress of intra-African movement, there'll be visas, expensive etiquettes, custom clearances, and border control makes traveling and doing business in Africa very difficult. Most African countries don't trade with themselves. Kenya transported goods of over $60 billion last year, and only 60 million or less went to its neighbors Ethiopia. Whilst Ethiopia imports most of the goods Kenya has, Ghana imports rice and tomatoes in huge quantities as well as chicken, but Nigeria exports its quantities into other places. If the West African gas pipeline is anything to take an example from, and the ECOWAS inter-country movement, as well as the EDs, the East African communities, anything to show by, we can see that the transportation of goods and services is the reason why the EAC is one of the best performing sub-regions on the continent. Because aside the fact that they are able to trade among themselves, they are able to work, services are connected and interrelated among themselves. And so you can be in Kenya and work in Uganda, or you can be in Ethiopia and work in Tanzania. And so graduates in those areas who have mostly attended Makerere and might not be Ugandan have the chance to work and have their skills developed in these areas. And this is one of the reasons why countries like Rwanda are really growing, because in as much as their human resource is not up to the level they wish to be, the East African community gives them the leverage to have people from Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, etc. come and work there. Now, lastly, it would increase trade among African countries. As I've said, less than 1/5 of all exports are currently from one African country to another. What the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is proposing is to remove trade taxes on at least 90% of all trade between African countries. This is expected to boost trade by nearly over 1 billion a year, creating more jobs and services across the African continent. This is also targeted at sectors such as manufacturing, processed food, textiles, etc. The demand for things like textiles among many African countries, the new crave for things like kaftan and dashikis, as well as by virtue of Wakanda and Black Panther's success, the crave for African costume is also one which gives the potential for African textile companies to also manufacture things all across the world, all across the continent, and trade across the continent. Cassava, maize, and rice especially are one of the staples and most consumed food meals by Africans from all across the continent. And so it absolutely makes no sense for countries in Africa to be importing these goods from many other countries in East Asia and Southern America. And this is because of the high levels of taxes that are put on goods from other African countries. And so after coming into this, takes this away. Now finally, one of the most important points, which was propagated by Kwesi Agri, by Kwame Nkrumah, by Samora Machel, and by Thomas Sankara, that the liberation of Africa is very important and moves hand in hand with the liberation of women all across Africa. And trade happens mostly with women. And so with women being given trade being given the leverage, women are going to be liberated and Africa will be liberated. This is my proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. For that interesting opening to today's conversation. David, you disagree obviously with where he's coming from. Tell us why you disagree.
Okay. I'd like to begin by saying that to build a house, you do not start with the roof, right? And in essence, what NI has proposed and what this agreement ultimately seeks to achieve is to flip the order in which things are meant to be done. Europe as a continent has had its countries, at least in their modern incarnation, for centuries. But it took only the last couple of decades for Europe to finally coalesce into the European Union and the European Exclusive Economic Zone, and I'm going to be showing why. For Africa, Afcfta is quite premature, but ultimately, if he says he's Pan-Africanist, and I agree with him that we indeed should move towards a closer union as a continent, that's a paradigm that ultimately is predicated upon national identities or the identities of nation states, is is ultimately problematic and shouldn't be the way to go. So those are the two things I'll be showing in my speech. But first of all, let me clarify ultimately what the situation of Africa is. This is a continent which preponderantly, right, is extractive in nature. Our economy is extractive. Cocoa is being produced here and in Cote d'Ivoire. Lots of, agricultural produce are being made all across Africa, but very little industrial activity for the refinement of those products is occurring, right? So is Ghana ultimately going to export its cocoa to Cote d'Ivoire, which has more than an abundance of same, right? Multiple countries on the continent have very similar produce. We ultimately, based on the abundance of natural resources on the continent, would not be doing much for ourselves if that is the sort of trade that we would engage in, right? That is one thing we need to keep in mind. Another thing we need to keep in mind is there is a great disparity on the continent in terms of governmental policies, in terms of the state of being of countries, from insecurity in northeast Nigeria to mass poverty in parts of the continent. You must recognize that when a continent is so diverse in its demographics, right, you cannot just bring about a policy that immediately is pushing towards a greater union of these countries without distributing at the same time the problems that exist all across the continent. I'm going to be expatiating upon that subsequently. So let us then move into the crux of my disagreement with Nii today. First of all, we need to recognize that we have the steps all wrong. The steps to integration cannot begin as is being proposed with economic integration and then freedom of mobility and the likes, right? If we want greater union on the African continent, we must begin first of all with cultural reformation and the deprecation of ethnic and national exceptionalism. How so? We must recognize that South Africa, for example, though it benefited greatly from all African countries in its fight against apartheid, still has massive amounts of xenophobia. We still have ethnic and nationalist exceptionalism on the continent, which means people still pride themselves on being South African and are different or superior to the Zimbabwean or the Somali, right? So creating free movement of goods and services between these countries does not solve that underlying cultural misunderstanding that exists on the continent. If anything, it is likely going to exacerbate it. In a country where you already have people who are unemployed blaming the foreigners for their lot, in Ghana, for example, you already have people who are calling for the closure of shops which are owned by Nigerians in Circle and the likes. And then you then say, oh, you want to expand this cooperation between our countries immediately. I believe you are likely going to have a backlash. And that backlash is more likely going to lead to the worsening of xenophobia rather than the weakening of it. So we must fix national exceptionalism. People should not have pride in identities that were foisted upon us by white men, right? People should not be so proud of being Ghanaian and feeling so superior to the Burkinabe, right? But should ultimately begin by an understanding, right, that we are one people. When that cultural problem, I believe, is fixed, then we can take other steps towards a closer union. Let's talk about the problem in governance, right? Because whether we like it or not, several African countries currently are captured by the West. I'm sorry to say, but our Francophone brothers in West Africa are currently under much economic, domination by France, right? What this means is that whatever policies are occurring in these countries, for the most part, are hugely being influenced by Europe. So what then happens when it is free movement of goods and services, etc., from these countries to Ghana, for example, or to Nigeria? It is simply going to mean that, whatever is France's interest, it's going to be enacted, or that hegemony, which France already has over these countries, would simply be spread to all the countries that are within this agreement that now must be bounded to do trade. And let's give a clearer example of this, right? So for one, if you have a free port in Togo, and Ghana is trying to encourage its cocoa processing industry to develop chocolate or other products which are higher value from the raw agricultural produce, right? If Ghana then decides that it wants to sign this agreement and is in a closer union with Togo, whatever is being imported from France coming through these ports free of charge will be dumped on the Ghanaian market and will destroy Ghanaian industry that is very fledgling, right? It will not be allowed to rise. Without going into hypotheticals, there is a clear example of this, and it's the AGOA, right? The African Growth and Opportunities Act, which the United States foisted upon many African countries. If you have studied the African Growth and Opportunities Act, a name I greatly despise because it presumes Africans are growing or have benefited from any opportunities by this act. So it was passed in the Obama era, and this act has ultimately led to much exfiltration of wealth from the continent. What has the US brought us? They've brought the advanced machinery and the likes, but they've also brought wasted excess product which cannot find a market in their country. For example, right? The US spends about $20 billion annually on agri subsidies. This is how much they give to their farmers, and they encourage, overproduction essentially. So the US produces way more than its economy can contain. What it then does is it keeps those products which means the highest levels of quality for their own markets, and sends the excess products which are a waste, surplus to requirements in their own market, to countries like Nigeria and Ghana who have signed the African Growth and Opportunities Act. That is why the Ghanaian poultry farmer cannot compete with products that have crossed an entire ocean to get here. Chickens that come from the US will still be cheaper than those that are grown here, because the peasant farmer, the small and medium enterprise in Ghana, is competing against $20 billion which is being pumped into American enterprises. You cannot compete. Now imagine AGOA not just occurring within the limited countries that have signed that pact with the US, but imagine it on a continental scale where Europe and all these other countries can begin to dump all their excess produce and suppress African industry. That is exactly what you are going to get, right? So we need to then understand that yes, free trade is good, but we must solve the underlying problems before we push towards a greater unity. So let me quickly extol the virtues of protectionism for developing countries. We must recognize that no country has truly achieved its full potential without a period where it coddles its industry, where it gives them preferential treatment over the industries of other countries around the world. And this is achieved through protectionist policies. The US has done it in terms of dairy and agriculture and all that. So African countries must identify sectors that are of important strategic value to them and exclude imports which threaten those sectors and allow those sectors to grow. Nigeria, for example, closed its borders because there was an over importation of rice. For example, we don't have a shortage of fertile land to produce our own rice and our own cereals, right? But yet all our products of that kind come from Vietnam and Southeast Asia, because those places have an overproduction, and then they are over competing, or rather out competing local manufacturing, which does not have the same billions being pumped in terms of subsidies, right? You would call this competition, you might say, but I dare say it is not competitive, because ultimately you have the skills being tipped to one side by the government. So we must have protectionism for us to develop the industrial capacity. We must also recognize that free trade agreements in many instances historically have fostered an asymmetry, right, of outcomes for countries. There are countries in Africa that definitely will benefit way more from Afcfta than other countries. The countries that are, for example, smaller in terms of their economic strength, that have cheaper labor, would benefit at least initially, because business is incentivized by profit, and Ghanaian industries are likely to move to Burkina Faso or wherever else if they know that they can operate in these neighboring countries, benefit from the cheap labor that exists there, and then pump all those products here. Ghana will be losing tax revenues in the process. Nigeria, for example, will continue to lose foreign reserves because it is buying products that are being imported from Vietnam or France, which are being smuggled in through Benin Republic or Togo, because now Nigeria and Benin or Togo have these free trade agreements, and there are no tariffs being placed on it. At the end of the day, this is a policy that is bad for the fledgling industries that we have on the continent, and we must be very clear. In as much as we want African integration, we cannot put the roof before the foundation. We must start with the basis of African unity before getting to this zenith.
Great. Very, very interesting opening discussion that we've had with respect to the African continental free trade area. Neil has been arguing primarily that because of the immense benefits that we've seen in regional blocs such as the EU, Africa must promote intra-African trade, and Afcfta is a positive step in that direction. David disagrees. David says Africa needs to look inward to tackle problems such as xenophobia and issues such as the protection of their economies before they look into issues of expanding towards intra-African trade, because at the end of the day, African countries want to protect themselves, protect their interests and their economies, and that should ultimately be the focus. In his words, let's look at the foundation before we go on to build the roof. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very interesting and interactive session. We ask you to join us by asking your questions in the comment section of the Facebook stream. We also ask you to participate in the poll. Remember, you can vote near the share button on the Facebook stream in case who you think is winning today's discussion, today's debate. We very much need your participation in that regard. Also, ask your questions so that we can be able to ask the participants these questions and have them engaged in that regard. We shall be going for a short break. When we return, we shall be going to responses. But just before we go for the break, let me tell you about Codex. Codex is a platform that allows young people like you and I to invest in agricultural funding and farming products, such that we can involve ourselves in investing in these projects and allow good returns for ourselves. I encourage you to visit codex.com, on which project you can invest in and get huge returns on your investment. We shall be right back. The Hangout provides a platform for young people to debate national and international issues and extend the dialogue amongst the youth. It is therefore important that you out there support this program. If you're interested in joining us and being a partner for this program, please call any of the numbers on your screen and we'll be glad to give you feedback in that respect. We look forward to collaborating with you and we hope you join us on this platform. Right, welcome back to the Hangout debate. We're here for another edition of this very interesting series. We've been with David Ejim of the University of Ilorin and Mr. Aaron Ikomi of the University of Ghana. We have been discussing the African Continental Free Trade Area. Each of the speakers have opened with their 10 minutes for in terms of their substantive arguments. We shall now be taking responses. I shall like to begin the responses session with Mr. Komi, who shall indicate to us the points he dissents with Mr. David Ejim. So, Mr. Komi, you obviously disagree with many of the things he has said. Why?
So, to disagree would be a strong word to use. I just acknowledge the concerns he has raised, but I also acknowledge that these concerns have been greatly factored and considered in bringing about the economic African Continental Free Trade Area. So, first, he raises the concern about how the European countries have taken the time to reach where they are today. In 1963, when Nkrumah was speaking about the opening of the African Organization of African Union, in a point he had made in 1958 at the African Freedom Fighters Award, Nkrumah made this very important point, which is to address the issue about how long it takes European countries. That if European nations have taken centuries to build, African countries need to do that in one generation to survive. We are running a race, and if we are going to wait to have the same level of time that the European nations took, we might probably never get that chance. We have to catch up. They are including the point that they are not going to wait for us to get to where they are, and so having to take the same amount of time that it took for them to get to where they are today might be difficult. Another point is that if we are not building the house from the roof, as I stated earlier on, there are systematic procedures that was suggested. The first was that we get our freedom and independence. The second was that we consolidate our freedom and independence. The third point about identity was the creation of economic community and unity between the independent African states. The reasons for the sub-blocks that have been formed and the Organization of African Unity that has been formed. The European Union has 23 different countries and speak 21 different languages, but have still managed to integrate economically. What does this mean? That economic integration has nothing to do with national identity, and that it is only a consensus of opinion. It is only a common interest that unites people to economically integrate, and that is why we need to integrate as fast as we can. Yes, we might have certain challenges, but you see, what the Afcfta does is that the Afcfta will build on the successes and correct the failures of the AU and other economic communities we have. As Nkrumah said, it is servitude in danger. Sorry, it is governance in danger, self-governance in danger, than servitude in tranquility. It is better we try what we have than wait to go back into what we have. He says that Nkrumah also said that the thing independence grants us is that we have the ability to make our mistakes and correct our own mistakes. And so what economic integration will be doing is that it will build on the shared history and culture of its members to further the common good. So with the shared history of countries like Ghana, which was why Nkrumah himself proposed the non-aligned movement, and in countries with specific economic ideas. Why was the OPEC taken from that? Because the OPEC is an oil producing bloc that has all countries. It's the same thing we can do with cocoa producing countries, or shea nuts producing countries, or cashew producing countries, or even tea producing countries in Africa. You see, and so because of our shared culture and history, we have a shared future, and this shared future can be achieved in economic independence. If Togo doesn't produce cocoa, there's no need for Togo to join in the cocoa production hub. But you see, what also this does is that about the national exceptionalization. The African identity is one that was first formed. The African personality is one that we have spoken about. At independence, Nkrumah told us that we should build an African personality and show the whole world that the African is capable of managing his own affairs. What this does is that it's the advantages of living and working in an economically powerful region increases opportunities. What this does is that, you see, we are going to have both people having opportunities to work in an economically powerful region, increasing opportunities for work, trade, etc. At the same time, they preserve the advantages of living in a smaller state, connection to political processes, and respect for local traditions. The fact that Ethiopia trades with Tanzania and Kenya trades with Rwanda doesn't mean that the Maasai have no respect for the Kiswahili people, or it doesn't mean that the people of South Sudan or the people in the Sahel regions have no respect for the people in Ethiopia. It just means that what integrates them is the economic unity that is going to go. Now, lastly, the problem of colonial ties is a problem that has been raised and addressed essentially. That you see, the necessary capital for all these developments can only be accumulated by the employment of our resources on a continental extension, as I said, as we have seen with the West African gas pipeline project. This calls for a central organization to formulate a comprehensive economic policy for Africa, which will embrace the scientific, methodological, economic planning of our ascent from poverty into industrial greatness. These are things we can achieve with a unity of purpose, including our African countries, devoid of colonial ties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aaron, for those responses. Let me remind you quite shortly, just before Mr. David comes up, about the voting platform that is now available. You can check the voting link just near the share button. You can check and cast your vote for who you think is winning today's debate. Remember, you can also send in your comments. We try to read them as much as possible. Mr. Ejim, take it away for us.
I agree with Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and our comrade here, Nikomi, when he says that, we must gain independence, then broaden our identity, then finally seek economic integration. But notice that in my speech, I established that many African countries still are not independent. Independent in name, they might be. They might celebrate a day of independence, perhaps, but many still are not independent. When your financial and economic policies, even your currency, is being dictated by an European power in 2020, you aren't independent. So what we must recognize, therefore, is all of Africa has not truly achieved this ideal that our founding fathers fought for so many decades ago, right? And what we, as the African community, must be trying to do is liberate these brethren who are still stuck, right, in this full sort of independence which they have, received. Beyond that, a political lack of independence, we must also recognize that, we must, as a matter of course, as a people, develop self-sufficiency. Many African countries are still very dependent on China, for example, for financial aid, still dependent on the United States for even the formation of its laws. In the Nigerian legal books, in our statutes, we still have laws that predate our independence. We still have laws carried over from British times. We still have traditions here of wearing wigs and all sorts of things that are relics of the colonial era. We must recognize that whereas many of these things may seem symbolic, right, there is an actual tangible holdover, right? The fact that our thought processes are still, to many of us, being seen as inferior, our laws still being guided by these foreign sources of influence, is cause for worry. Because when you then integrate, what are you then integrating? You are integrating a bunch of people with inferiority complexes, with lack of self-sufficiency. You are integrating people who are still being dictated to by their foreign powers. And at the end of the day, instead of integrating people who are bringing solutions to the table, you are integrating all of our problems, and I believe that would only multiply those problems, right? So I agree, yes, we should seek integration, but first, are we independent? That is the question which, I believe should be answered in the negative. We must also recognize a few other things. For one, we must recognize that, yes, the acceleration of our development is necessary. I agree we can't wait for centuries like Europe had. I merely raised that example of Europe to show that, they pursued protectionism and got their economies to a position of strength, and then came together as bodies or parties who had already achieved some semblance of global domination to further improve their hegemony. That is what Europe did. Europe didn't come together as a bunch of third world countries which were struggling and lacking independent governance. They came together when they had achieved some semblance of stability in their economy. They didn't export their instability throughout the continent. So yes, we do not need to all speak the same language. Yes, we do not all need to be one tribe before Africa integrates, but we must recognize, as I've stated earlier, that these problems must be fixed. So let's talk about solutions, right? We must recognize, for example, that the African continent, beset by so many problems with security, should be moving towards greater collaboration for the eradication of those security threats. Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, and Chad already have formed a sort of coalition in the northeast of Nigeria to fight the Boko Haram problem. We are seeing more leadership from Nigeria and Ghana with the problems in Mali, with the coups and other leadership crises that are occurring. We need even more of that, right? We need African leaders who stand up to their brethren and say, you are being a dictator, you are oppressing your people. We need Akufo-Addo, for example, to call Buhari and say, why is it that a unit in your police force is slaughtering your people? That is unacceptable. When we do not check ourselves, then it behoves on the United States to come and police occurrences on the continent. We will not achieve independence when we are allowing room for external imposition, right, on our security. So we must begin, first of all, to collectivize and eradicate the security threats. Who is Al-Shabaab, for example, that the EAC countries, the East African countries, cannot come together and exterminate? Or Boko Haram, or the Tuareg rebels in Mali that West African forces in ECOMOG cannot come together and exterminate? We must achieve self-sufficiency in terms of security, and from that, greater collaboration through freedom of movement, etc., would then create the ripe environment for us to talk about trade.
Great. With that said, that brings to the end the first stage of our debate process. Mr. David Ejim and Mr. Nikomi have been debating the issues surrounding the African Continental Free Trade Area, and then we'll be looking forward to your discussion in the next segment when we have the questions thrown to them. We shall return very shortly for that segment. Stay tuned. At this point, we shall take your questions, and I shall be throwing these questions to our participants, and they shall be taking turns to answer them. So the first two set of questions are for you, David. This one says, markets are collectivizing all around the world. The results have been immense for Europe especially. You seem to favor the old gradualist approach with cultural political cooperation first. But you admit you're a Marxist, that the economy comes first and all others follow. What then is your position on the subject? That's the first question. The second question to you is, how different would Afcfta be from organizations like ECOWAS of West Africa? If ECOWAS has succeeded, why won't the Afcfta succeed?
Okay. So, yes, indeed, I am a Marxist. But let me begin with the ECOWAS question. To be very fair, I do not think ECOWAS has succeeded. I think ECOWAS is better than what existed before it, but you cannot call, what we have a success. As a Nigerian, I can only be in Ghana for about 90 days before I need to file certain documents and seek the leave to remain. We do not have true mobility of labor, right? It costs me less to go to Dubai than to go to the Gambia, right? That is ECOWAS for you. We do not have that free-flowing movement of people and goods and services. Yes, it's good because, you do not need like a visa to travel between these countries. But for those who have traveled by land in the region, you have to pay bribes. That is the visa fee, right? At the end of the day, we have so many onerous restrictions, some not being done at the level of governments, but being done at the level of individuals who are not being checked by government, whether it's extortions at the border, whether it's all sorts of other, infrastructural bottlenecks that prevent mobility of people. And these need to be eliminated before we can truly say ECOWAS is a success. However, on the question of markets collectivizing, we must recognize that there is a global pushback at the moment against collectivized markets. You would see that an individual like Donald Trump, for example, wouldn't come to power without his message resonating with people. You must recognize, even if you do not agree with him or anything, his message about making America great again and returning manufacturing jobs to the United States is a message which very soon you will hear across Africa. If industries in Nigeria start moving to Niger or Chad, for example, we would say make Nigeria great again, bring back our textile jobs, or make Ghana great again, bring back our jobs in A, B, and C sector, right? We must recognize that all around the world where globalization has occurred, it has favored some, yes. Globalization lifted 800 million people out of poverty in China. I agree, that's the benefit. But it has created a permanent underclass in places like the United States who are now more prone to radicalization and white nationalism and ultimately voting in an individual like Donald Trump. It has created many individuals like those in the United Kingdom who supported Brexit because they believe the Polish people are coming to the United Kingdom and are taking away their jobs. So let us Brexit, let us close our borders, and maybe Britain will be great again. At the end of the day, we must recognize that this is a balancing act, right? If we accelerate global collectivization, right, we might end up having a worsening of xenophobia, because what we already see in South Africa is a little bit of, what we are likely to see even more of across Africa. When lots of people fled Zimbabwe after the economic collapse under Robert Mugabe in the late 2000s, you recognize that all these individuals, fled into South Africa, sought opportunities there, and then the backlash that we are seeing right now is as a result of people rejecting that, right? So we do not want even more of that problem.
Thank you very much. On that note, I'll come to you here. This is from Shafiq. Shafiq says, difference in language matters. Difference in language matters less in Europe because there's a near unifier in the unifier of culture and philosophy in Europe. As such, we cannot flippantly disregard the presence of a unity in identity in European countries. Flowing from this, how do we engage the question of exceptionalism, which is self-evident in some African countries, and potentially debilitating of any gains we could potentially get from a free trade zone as shown from Egypt's analysis? So that's Shafiq's question. The second question is from Abdul Wahid Banjoko. He says, how will Africans achieve food security if products are exported to African countries, and how will raw products be transformed into finished products so as to achieve self-industrialization if exportation is the order of the day? So just to run you through quickly again, Shafiq is asking you the question that because of the likelihood of a cultural significance in Europe, they are more likely to coalesce over a certain subject. That is why the EU has succeeded. But considering the inherent differences we find in African countries and all the analysis AGM has been doing in respect of how we have different problems and the need to protect the economies, how do you reconcile these two instances?
Okay, so first Shafiq's question. We should understand that Europe at every point in time, even though they had differences, glaring differences, and fought two tribal wars, which we refer to as world wars. Europe sat together at a table like this in 1886 and 1887 and shared Africa like a cake for economic reasons. And so when it becomes to terms of economics, they have had common interest when they were sharing Africa in Berlin. They have had a common interest when they were sharing Africa after World War II. They have had a common interest in sharing Africa in as much as consolidating their economic gains in Africa, in as much as their differences have caused them to scatter their countries and cause disasters among various countries. So when it comes to economic integration among these people, the first thing is that the benefit or the interest of these people at large is paramount before the egos and political innuendos of these countries is put inside there. Secondly, as Ejim himself definitely stated, the countries that are favoring nationalist leaders are countries that are big enough to be able to stand on their own and have economies that can grow. So when America says that it wants a Donald Trump, America has a landmass area as big as West Africa and a population of over 300 million people that in the shortest time can be hedged on its own and still will be able to have the African and Southern American markets to go to. It doesn't mean that they are going to be self-independent and trade among themselves. It's the same thing that might go according to with the UK and France, because what they have realized is that competition from these African countries in places like Gabon and Mali and Angola, where other African countries are investing, where the likes of engineers and planners are competing with companies from Belgium in Congo, means that trade isn't going back to the countries where they came from. The systems of countries like England and France is built on exploitation of African countries. And so if Africa is to integrate, yes, we are going to have the problems that England and France are having, but that is to the benefit of Africans themselves, because the person who stands to benefit from this form of problems in the West are the people who have been exploited for a long time, which have resulted in these problems. Now, again, I make the point about the importance of foreign aid, about what is done here. When I said that Africa has to develop in one generation, I did not say that we are going to develop without assistance or aid from anywhere. Indeed, I'll mention two people. Dambisa Moyo said that aid that makes you coming back for another aid is dead aid. And Nkrumah also said that what we want, Nkrumah also said at the building of the Akosombo Dam, which was to industrialize the whole West African region, which for a long time provided electricity to Burkina Faso, Liberia, Togo and Benin, as well as Ivory Coast, said that what we want from you is to cooperate in the economic and profitable business development of our resources. This means that if either your government or your investors put money into our country, we want it to go into sound projects and schemes which will ultimately lead to the repayment of initial investments. What has happened is that Akosombo Dam has been built by foreign investors, by the Kaiser, and how the Valco Aluminium project went and all. But it has come to the benefit of Africa, of Ghanaians and West Africans to an extent, because that project now can pay off, has built towns like Akosombo and Tema, and is able to stretch well for people like Ivory Coast, Liberia, Togo and Benin to build upon. And that is how we are going to industrialize. That there is going to be the centralization of purpose from African countries, which would then have subsidies, or which would then spread its wings for other people to benefit, because Nigeria is an economic power and Niger would depend on the Niger basin, even that comes out of it, and Kenya is an economic, Congo is an economic power and can consider and have energy that will benefit the whole Central African region, like Central African Republic, etc. And so integrating all these things economically would mean that. And lastly, don't forget, Ngugi wa Thiong'o said that we have been colonialism and the history of Africa has given us more in common than more that does not, than there are differences that we have. And so we have the unity of purpose is a fundamental point of communalism, and that is why we as Pan-Africanists any day we propose economic integration, and the Afcfta is the way to go.
Very
Thank
interesting
you.
one. I'll just give each of you a minute to sum up, and then we are looking out. So David, very quickly, just a minute. Your concluding remarks.
I'd like to say that, look, my beliefs have always been born out of one for guaranteeing equity for all people. A unity of countries with these very varied problems that we've mentioned only spreads those problems across. And I believe that if you are looking at equity for smaller countries, you do not find it in this deal. If you are looking at equity for Africa and freedom from Western hegemony, you do not find it in this deal. Ultimately, you do not build a house with the roof as the first thing. And because we have not achieved cultural, political, and other forms of integration which are essential, we cannot then move all the way to economic integration. It only benefits the West and the bourgeoisie within these countries who would like to exfiltrate labor from other countries and, you know, lower their tax burdens, etc.
Very shortly.
I finished with the sayings I started with. The failure to travel in groups habit of snakes makes it easy for people with machetes to kill them. We aren't going to, we can't wait for the period we took, because it would cause more problems than solve. The women of Africa, who are going to be the biggest benefactors of integration, have to benefit from it, because if women are liberated economically, everyone will be liberated economically, and that is why I propose that the Afcfta has come as even long overdue. Thank you.
Wow, very interesting conversation here. In today's discussion on the African Continental Free Trade Area. Ni Komi, Ni with the quotes, always giving us very interesting quotes, has been arguing very strongly for the capacity and ability of the Afcfta to promote African integration. David has said that the Afcfta is a step that is far too far. Africa needs to take a lot of measures at this point before we go into that regard. We've had your comments, we've had your questions, and this has been a very instructive session. We shall be going on our last break. When we return, we shall be giving you the results of today's discussion. We shall be back shortly. The Hangout provides a platform for young people to debate national and international issues and extend the dialogue amongst the youth. It is therefore important that you out there support this program. If you're interested in joining us and being a partner for this program, please call any of the numbers on your screen, and we'll be glad to give you feedback in that respect. We look forward to collaborating with you, and we hope you join us on this platform. Right, welcome back to the Hangout debate. We've been discussing the African Continental Free Trade Area. The Hangout is brought to you exclusively by Speech Forces Organization with the help of Media Inc. Remember to be logging onto the Facebook page of Media Inc. They have very interesting content, and you'll be seeing very interesting programming as and when the weeks go by. Speech Forces Organization is a public interest and advocacy group. They help young people hone their talent skills and also help with migration studies, amongst other things. Visit speechforcesorg.com if you want to be a part of this debate series. We'll be looking out into a large potential pool of people that want to come onto this platform and engage in issues of importance, and so we look forward to you doing that. We do not take your audience and your viewership here every Saturday lightly. We look forward to seeing you all the time. Keep coming with your comments, your suggestions on how we can better this program, and we are more likely to engage you in that regard. At this juncture, it's my honor to indicate to you that the results of today's discussion is ready, and then I shall be reading that out to you. Many of you have been participating in this poll. I'm happy to say this is the largest number of people that have participated ever since we started the discussion in that regard. So there seems to be a lot of interest, and wow, this is interesting. I think I now get the sense of how the likes of Charlotte Osei and Jean Mensah feel when they have the honors to discuss results. But 87% of you think that Africa needs to do a lot of soul searching and build the foundation first, in the words of David Ejim. David has won today's debate as a result of the poll that was on Facebook. We thank you all for engaging. Congratulations, David. Per the rules of the game, we are expected to see you here next week. So we look forward to seeing you again next week, and we look forward to another very interesting and fruitful discussion. And thank you all for being here. My name is Joel Telfa. Remember, the Hangout is sponsored by Codex and Nest Consulting, and we thank them for their support. We ask you, corporations out there who are interested in supporting this program, to reach out to us. Our numbers are coming on the screen very shortly, and then we hope that you can join us in building this program and this platform. It has been a very interesting two-tiered conversation that we had. The first part was in respect of ending SARS. We call on the Nigerian government to take the appropriate steps to end SARS immediately. We also call on the Namibian government to do whatever that is required to end the femicide and gender-based violence that is very apparent. We call on the Ghanaian authorities as well to put their best resources to ensuring the killers of the Honorable Member of Parliament from Fansman constituency are brought to book. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings to end today's session. I'm Joel Telfa. See you next week. The Hangout provides a platform for young people to debate national and international issues and extend the dialogue amongst the youth. It is therefore important that you out there support this program. If you're interested in joining us and being a partner for this program, please call any of the numbers on your screen, and we'll be glad to give you feedback in that respect. We look forward to collaborating with you, and we hope you join us on this platform.